Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Strange Pathways. I am your host, Scott Mort. I hope you've had just an absolutely incredible week. I want to throw a big thank you out to a good friend, amazing man, the man I like to call Hugo Award winner, Chris Garcia. Chris said some wonderful things about me and this podcast on his show, Wide Unclasped. And I strongly suggest you go over there and check it out. It's a wonderful podcast about, in his own words, the Winchester House and all it entails. Chris is very familiar with the Winchester House, and the way that Chris lays out the story is it feels very personal. There are a lot of YouTubers and podcasters out there, myself included, who I consider fact vomiters. And that's what I am. I've got no illusions. I do a little investigation on the side. I do a little digging. But for the most part, I'm a fact vomiter. I go out, I find stories that absolutely thrill me, that enrapture me, that make me more curious about this strange universe that we're living in. I digest them and I vomit them back at you. Chris's podcast feels so much more personal than that. It's the difference between me, a tour guide, and a friend who takes your hand and says, "Come here, I want to show you something really cool." It really does feel like Chris is taking your hand, and I'm going to tell you this story about the way that my family interacted with this, and here's a neat little story about like the arcade that's near here. And Chris is just such a wonderful guy. He's, full disclosure, a very good friend of mine. And it's weird to say that because Chris and I have never met, but I do consider him a very, very good friend. We live in that world. I have a lot of friends, Chase, Xavier, Akan, Silver Moon. These are people I've never really met that live all over the world. Thomas, I know Thomas is listening right now. I've never met Thomas in real life, but I spend so much time with him online, in calls, and, we give each other advice. We help ourselves through the bad times. And Chris and all those people I mentioned, I hope that you're lucky enough to have people like that in your life. Everybody deserves that. Go over there. Check out Wide Unclasped. There's going to be a link in the show description down below, and it is a glorious, glorious podcast. It feels like a friend, and I think that's fantastic. Secondly, I do want to thank whoever threw out the wonderful, wonderful little hey on 4chan's X board. There was a thread about gnomes, and somebody went, "Hey, Strange Pathways did a podcast about gnomes." Hey, that was really neat. That was really neat to see. I actually just give it like a little bit of a cheer, grabbed my lovely wife Ariana. Go, "Hey, come look at this." We're a small podcast, and it's nice to see that people are enjoying what they're hearing. So, to whoever did that, thank you so very much. And please, get out there, spread the word. Let your friends, your family know I really want this podcast to grow. And I do a lot of research into this and really dig through a lot of stuff week to week because it's what I enjoy. I really love that. I've rambled on enough, though. My apologies. Let's start our first tale. There's a computer programmer and linguist. His name's Cliff High. He's He's an interesting fellow. Seems to do a lot of UFO footage. He's got a patent on a computer-assisted reading tech, which allows reading from computer screens at 2,000 words per minute. And he's developing a system of software internet agents and other proprietary processing methods to predict future events. Those are a lot of words that I personally don't understand. Now, the tale that I'm going to relate to you first started popping up on Reddit this week. I'm going to link you this. This will be linked over in the Facebook page. This is from another podcast called Forum Borealis. This is part 3 of 3. I have not had time to listen to the entire podcast. But in this part 3 of 3 from Forum Borealis of Antarctica Unveiled, Cliff High starts talking about his father, who was a Vietnam vet. His father had done 3 tours in the Vietnam War. And on one of these tours, he gets a bunch of these prototype night vision goggles. Now, the night vision goggles we have today, we see everything in greens. I've always been told gray was the color that human beings see the most. In the podcast, he said it's red. I don't know about that. Color is not my thing. I am colorblind. I actually have red-green color blindness. But in this podcast, he's saying that these night vision scopes, they allowed you to see in red. His father is in a helicopter. Now, the officers are not supposed to use the scopes. The pilots are not supposed to use the scopes, but the gunners can. The guy's like hanging out the side of the chopper with the machine guns. All of a sudden, this one gunner starts screaming, and he's shooting the gun out into the air at nothing. But there are other copters flying in close formation with them. You see the problem here. There's hot lead being spewed out the side of this one chopper at nothing. The gunner stopped. Cliff High's father reaches over. He thinks he's dealing with somebody just absolutely high on drugs, like heroin. Apparently there was a huge heroin problem at the time. He pulls off the goggles, and the guy said that he saw a demon. He saw this ugly demon flying alongside the helicopter. And the demon saw him. And he saw the demon. They locked eyes, and the demon gestures towards him. I don't know about you, but I think at that point, it's well within your right to spew hot lead at a demon. Remember, the pilots were not supposed to use these. The officers were not supposed to use these goggles. So they get down. Cliff High's father takes and puts on the goggles. And he's looking up at the canopy of the jungle. And he sees them. He sees them through the goggles, he sees these ugly, winged things. And they would take off from the treetops and fly. And you take the goggles off, there wasn't even a disturbance. The branches wouldn't move. The fog above the jungle would not be disturbed. He tells his men, stop using these. However, even after the use of the red night vision had ceased, a lot of the damage had been done. Most of the people who had used the red night vision at any length were having some real mental problems. I'm of three minds of this. If these were devices that accidentally allowed soldiers to see into a part of reality that our eyes can't, was it intentional? Was this an experiment that the U.S. government did on its own soldiers? We are at the era, Vietnam, where that kind of stuff is pretty rampant. Actually, we're well past the era of that, but we're kind of in the thick of it. You have Agent Orange being sprayed on our men. MK Ultra is probably still going on at this time in some form. Black men are getting syphilis and not being treated for it. So why wouldn't there be some sort of psyop to work on the psychology of our men? You have a small test subject, a small pool of test subjects, I should say. You have this legitimate night vision, but every once in a while you throw in a demon in there, just to see what it does to them. It would make sense that you wouldn't want the pilot to have one. You don't want the pilot losing it. You don't want your officers losing it, but gunner, a couple of soldiers. All acceptable losses, right? The second thought that goes through my head is, could this be some sort of variation of the Ganzfeld effect? I've done Ganzfeld several times. My wife has tried it once. She really didn't get a lot out of it. But I've tried it several times. I've hallucinated Baptist preachers speaking in tongues. I've hallucinated giant eyeballs staring at me, wide saucer-headed aliens. And the last time it was just, I was on the prow of the ship and seas going in front of me. Now, for those that don't know, the Ganzfeld, you essentially put a white covering over your eyes, keep your eyes open, and you listen to static, white noise. The brain doesn't like getting no information at all, so it starts to make stuff up. But that red field of vision, that red night vision, could this have been some sort of weird offshoot of the Ganzfeld effect? Psychologically, evolutionarily, red is a very, very soul-jarring color. There's a reason why stop signs are red. There's a reason why Why red is the top light of a stoplight. It grabs the attention. It's the color of our blood. That color, it makes us uneasy, whether you realize it or not. The color red makes you uneasy because your ancestors, the ones that got very panicky and did everything they could do not to see that color spurting forth from them, whenever they saw another animal latch into one of their tribe and they saw that color come out and they ran away and they hid, those are the ones that survived. So, is there something about that red field that picks up something in the brain? And the brain goes, I got nothing to worry about right now. I better make something to worry about. And I bet you know what I'm going to say the third one is. This is just an old war story. My dad had tons of them. My dad was a World War II vet. One of my favorites was how he was eaten alive by a tiger and forced his way through its digestive system. You know that didn't happen, and I know that didn't happen, but it's a fun story. And maybe that's what Cliff High's father was doing. It was a fun story for a very, very scary time. That fun story aspect, that got me thinking. And I did find this essay called The Secret of Seeing Charlie in the Dark. The Starlight Scope, Techno-Anxiety, and the Spectral Mediation of the Enemy in the Vietnam War. There was one tale in here that absolutely blew my mind where they were using night vision and how the sniper was able to pick off one of the enemies because this guy was coming up on his troop to kill them, and he was holding a firefly in between the thumb and forefinger of each hand, kind of waving them around. So instead of it looking like a soldier coming at them, it just looked like he was part of the fireflies. In this essay, he talks about a book by author Scott Mort named Starlight. It takes place during the Vietnam War, and his protagonist is named Tom Light, a U.S. Army sniper. His ability to stay alive and coupled with the high number of enemy kills kind of makes his fellow soldiers uneasy, nervous. And over time, Tom Light's military friends, his comrades, they believe that his night vision scope is making him clairvoyant. They believe he can see who amongst them will live and die. These rumors of Tom Light's powers, they reach the Vietnamese, and they get word that, hey, there's this American sniper, and he can raise the dead. These Vietnamese families search for him. They find him, and they beg him, can you please bring our recently killed fathers, mothers, children back from the dead? Now, of course, in the story, these are all just wild stories, but something is going on with his starlight scope, his night vision scope. When Tom Light looks through them, he sees dancing skeletons. He sees zombies moving about. He sees the face of the narrator's girlfriend in her home in Alabama. He sees invisible Viet Cong guerrillas as transparent ghosts. So the question is this a tale? Is Starlight by Scott Eli is that based on something that was told to him from the Vietnam War? Or is it the other way around? Did Cliff High's father hear this and think it would make a good war story to tell his buddies? Or are they simply disconnected? Our next tale takes us to Wallington Park in Nottingham, England, all the way back to October 29th, 1979. You probably know one of the buildings in Wallington Park. It's Wallington Hall. It was used as Wayne Manor in The Dark Knight Rises. It's here in Wallington Park that we get a group of 6 to 8 school children. Patrick, Andrew, Rosie, Julie, Glenn, Angie. All these kids, they're between 8 and 10 years old. I don't know how many of you are as old as me, but back in those days, 79, the 80s, kids had a little bit more range. Kids could do a little bit more than they can today. And this group of kids, they're out wandering in the late afternoon hours. Sun's dipping down. And even though they know that they should get home, they want to play just a little bit more. They come to this swamp. It's dismal. It's green. And it's closed to the public. Well, they're just kids, right? I know I've done my fair share whenever I was 8 to 13 years old of being in places that I shouldn't have been. Why are these kids any different? They decide to take a look around. It's whenever they get in, they hear this little bell chime. And they see about 20, 30 little tiny men. Now, they said these men are about half their height. So we're probably looking at somewhere in the 2-foot range, right? 4 foot for a 10-year-old. Yeah, that sounds about right. 2 feet. Their faces were very wrinkled. Their beards were white. But whenever it got towards like the end of the beard, red. It was like their hair was red and it had faded to gray except for the last little tip. Their heads had pointed caps with baubles on the end. And their pants, they were tight-fitting pants that were either yellow or green and blue shirts. And these little men drove around in tiny bubble cars that had no steering wheels. They had little bells instead of horns. They didn't make a sound, but they sped around at high speeds. and they could swerve and leap over objects. 30 of them. Think of that, 20 to 30 of these little cars. And these gnomes, that's what they called them, gnomes. They were laughing and screaming with joy. And they would kind of like chase the kids and laugh while they did it. And they'd zoom past them. These guys were having a grand old time. These kids were frightened. They spent about 15 minutes watching these gnomes. There were about 30 cars. There were about 60 gnomes. And they just drive around for like 15 minutes. The kids are scared. Even though these things are cheerful and they're happy and they're not really threatening, they get frightened. They run to the gate where they come in. These little things, they don't seem to like the lights outside. They don't follow them out into the street. Now these kids, they go and tell their parents, their teachers, and of course, no one believes them. But the school headmaster, let's give a little round of applause for the school headmaster. He questions these kids. He really digs down deep into the stories that they're telling, and he comes to the conclusion, I think they're telling the truth. They at least believe that they're telling the truth. He tapes them. And he himself says he remained very skeptical of what they saw, but he believes that what the children were describing was something that happened. He didn't think it was gnomes riding around to a bubble car, but he believed that they believed they were gnomes. This tale becomes known as the Wollaton fairies. And as this story gets out, as these stories tend to do, more people come forward saying they've seen things in Wallaton. There's one Marina Fry of Cornwall. When she was 4 years old in 1940, her and her older sisters, they were all sleeping in a bedroom, and they heard this weird buzzing noise, music, bells, and they look out the window, and they see a little man in a tiny red car driving around in circles. They said this little man was about 18 inches tall and has a white beard and a droopy, pointed hat. After a while, he just sort of disappears, fades away. A Mrs. C. George said she saw gnomes playing by the park gates with their cars parked at the side. A Mrs. Brown said she was guided around the park by these things in a game. And whenever she would get to a new checkpoint, they would give her a little feather. Jean Dixon, she witnessed gnomes roaming around. And these little guys, they were really eager to show her around. Author Marjorie Johnson said that in the early 1900s, she seen several tiny men about 3 feet high that were playing in Wallington, dressed as policemen. There are incidents as recent as 2016. Daniel Sedgwick saw a gnome kind of lurking around close to the train tracks. He said he caught a glimpse of 5 small hat-wearing creatures pretty close to the city of Attenborough. I mean, these things don't really seem like a threat, do they? Last week we had the tale of the gnome, and he seemed very, very much like a threat. These guys just seem playful. Is it a matter of location? I've heard that the western mountain lions are very dangerous, and the eastern mountain lions were not very dangerous. They're still around, by the way. A lot of people will tell you that the eastern mountain lion is extinct, but everybody that I know who's spent any time in the woods has a mountain lion story from Pennsylvania, myself included. I've seen close to a dozen. Don't let them fool you. They're here. I would say probably the eastern mountain lion is probably the most likely cryptid that I know of. But these gnomes, back to the gnomes, they just seem like they want to play and drive around their cars. If you want to see one of the sketches the children did of the gnomes and their tiny little bubble cars, head on over to the Strange Pathways Facebook page. I'll have some pictures posted up there. Our last tale, and this is going to be a quick one, but our last tale is going to take us all the way back to March 4th, 2022. I frequent the X boards on 4chan. And I will say this. I'm not a fan of Reddit. I do go to Reddit. I think there are some interesting things on Reddit, but I don't like the temporary nature of it. With 4chan, it's a different problem. You have to dig through a lot to find the stuff that's interesting. But there was a post on 4chan. The thrust of this post was the Large Hadron Collider at CERN is going to be fired up again. And that is going to shift everybody back to 2012. It's going to loop us around. This is probably LARPing. This is probably just somebody making up a story. This is live action role playing. Somebody making up a story. But at the same time, I did find it interesting. A poster on 4chan said that there is going to be a key that you can memorize, that all the elites are going to memorize, so that whenever things are reset back to, I believe it's April 1st, 2012, that they will be able to retain their memories. They'll go back to the bodies that they had in 2012, but knowing these 7 phrases will allow them to retain their memories. These phrases are Orange, Trump, August. Yellow, Kennedy, April. Green, Grant, May. Red, Jackson, July. Blue, Eisenhower, November. Violet, Washington, June. Indigo, Clinton, January. And then the post continues as follows. All 7 keys acquired. Please screenshot this post and post it when newer threads come. We come a very long way, and we had a ton of help of our gematria expert, and we finally achieved it. I suggest you guys memorize these keys to the best of your abilities. You don't want to be left standing there on the altar forgetting one of them. Today might have been the day this board has achieved one of the greatest feats it's ever embarked on. Maybe this whole site, possibly. We just unlocked our memories, and now we have the power to return back and change things for good. Invest wisely, memorize sports wins for gambling, use wins to buy more crypto, use your newfound wealth for positive influence, so we negate the evil from the ruling class. Today you are slaves to the system, but tomorrow you'll be the heroes people will sing about. Thank you, gentlemen. We have 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I don't really think this is going to happen. Will I be memorizing these, though? Yes. Why not? It takes little to no effort. I'm going to try to convince my wife to memorize these. We met back in 2012, about 10 years ago. Maybe even further back. I'm not very good with time. If I can convince my wife to memorize these, it'll be no small feat. She's going to roll her eyes and give me the look. But bear with me here. If I go back to 2012, I can change a lot. I think it might be enough time to save my mother. My mother passed away from cancer. It was rough. And April 1st, 2012 might be enough time for me to go back and actually save her. Some wonderful things have happened to me in the past 10 years. Some rough stuff has happened to me in the past 10 years. Honestly, I think if it wasn't for my mother, I wouldn't want to go back. But according to this, we may not have a lot of free will in this case. We may be forced to go back. So why not memorize the phrases? Imagine this. I love my wife. I was in 2 serious relationships before I met my wife, Ariana. And I didn't know what it was like to love somebody until I met her. So imagine if the one in an infinity chance, it's not even 1 in a million, it's not 1 in a billion, it's a 1 in infinity chance that this is legit. That we are not going to have a choice. Imagine being able to get 10 more years with my wife. 10 years that I could do exactly as he said. Invest the crypto. I'm a stock trader now. I wasn't a stock trader back then. but I know all the moves. I would know exactly what to invest in. Hint, Tesla, Bitcoin, and Ethereum. But the thought that I could save my mom, the thought that I could wake up with my memories intact, April 1st, 2012, and drag my mother by her lower lip to the doctor and insist, scream and fight and yell and insist that she gets an MRI in her colon, her liver, and her lungs, where they would find the cancer and remove it in time, instead of seeing her deteriorate. The fact that I could go back and change all that, and all I have to do is memorize these 7 phrases, these 21 words. It's a 1 in infinity shot. I feel silly doing it. I know that what's going to happen April 1st, and I am very well aware of the date. The fact that I know that what's going to happen after April 1st, 2022 is April 2nd, 2022, and I will wake up and nothing will have changed. I don't think it's going to stop me. What do I have to lose? I memorized 21 words, and I'm done. For that 1 in infinity chance of being able to save my mother. I'll take that. Thank you for joining us again this week on Strange Pathways. So much love going out to you guys who have been getting the word out there. I'm seeing the numbers start to grow on the YouTube channel, on Facebook. I'm starting to see the numbers grow on the download page on Anchor FM for this podcast. Do me a favor. In the YouTube comments, do all that. Click like, subscribe. Yeah, do all that. Hit the little bell for the notifications. But in the comments below, tell me what you would change if you could go back to April 1st, 2012 with your memories intact. Let me know what you would change in the comments below. I'm curious. Once again, go over to the Facebook page. We're going to have plenty of images dealing with this week's tales over there. And thank you so much for listening. I know things are scary out there right now. But if each one of us does a little something nice between now and next week, it can do a world of good. So, as always, take care of yourselves and each other.